My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Tonight's special one-hour edition is a follow-on to a program we had on recently where we had Greg Gerritt, who's the Director of Research and Forest Dome at Prosperity for Rhode Island, and we were joined by Jeff Mignault, who is the Executive Director of Climate Action Rhode Island. We invited them back to continue the discussion. Mr. Mignault had another commitment, but we're pleased to welcome back Greg Gerritt. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Now, in our last program, we spent a half an hour discussing various things related to the environment. And toward the end of it, Mr. Gerritt said, gee, I wish we had more time to talk about the economic impact of climate change on Rhode Island. And so I'm going to open up and give Mr. Gerritt the floor to go ahead and talk to our audience and me about what the effect is.
Great. This is a big issue. It takes a lot of things. And what I've been focusing on is the idea that we need a climate justice economy. It's not just climate, but it's the political and social milieu in which you can do good climate action. Recently, in fact, I read about it yesterday, Nicholas Stern from the London School of Economics put out a little paper. Well, he put out a book, and there was an article about it in The Guardian. And it basically says, if we don't get straight on climate, we're not going to have much of an economy in the future. I've been talking about this for about a year and looking at all these other sources. Munich Re is the biggest reinsurance company in the world. They have been on this case for a long time, saying the losses to the economy from not getting right on climate, from allowing, runaway climate change to see the temperature soaring, the losses are going to be astronomical. Already we're finding places that won't, you can't get insurance for hurricanes. You can't get insurance for fires. You can't get insurance for floods. Those things, climate change makes worse. We have to be very clear. The physics of climate change is absolutely settled science. The temperature rises that we see actually match the amount of, they predicted in 1896 how much the temperature would go up as the carbon dioxide went up. It practically matches identically. So we've known about this for 130 years, and we're seeing the result. The temperatures are now 1.2 degrees centigrade above the average temperature prior to industrialization, using 1750 as the start of the industrial age with the steam engines and burning a lot of coal. And that's really where it starts. So you've got that issue. And then once you've got temperature rises, you get bigger storms. The hurricanes get much stronger because the water's hotter, and hurricanes feed off of hot water. If a hurricane won't survive until it's the temperature of the surface of the sea is at least 82 degrees. And now, you've got places where, like in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Caribbean, where you'll see water temperatures of about 100 degrees. And so if a hurricane goes over that water, it's just going to suck up more and more energy and more water off of it and get bigger and faster and stronger. And this is what's happening. The most powerful hurricanes we've ever seen all over the world, not only on the east coast of the United States, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but in the Pacific Ocean, both on the eastern shore of the Pacific, California, Arizona, those are getting storms. Mexico is getting stronger storms. And on the East Asian side, the Indonesia, the Philippines, China, Japan, those guys are getting blasted with storms, especially in East Asia, of like 230 miles an hour storms. So the damage from a storm like that is immense. And, the U.S. were about to get rid of FEMA, And so it's going to be an entire generation of impoverished people trying to rebuild after these kinds of disasters. It will be immensely hard. So you're going to have those kinds of losses. You're going to have the kinds of losses of droughts and floods on agricultural production. You're going to have the deforestation issues. And in a place like Brazil, when you deforest, you lose the rainfall, so you get worse droughts. You know, the Middle East is getting worse droughts. So agriculture is falling apart. And once agriculture starts to fall apart, you got people on the move. Right now, there are more refugees than any time in the history of the planet, except during World War II. Right now, there's about 60 million people who are moved across borders. You know, there's twice as many of them internally displaced in their own country. But more than 60 million people are on the move across borders because of drought, fire, and the kinds of things that happen to governments when you have drought and flood and famine. You know, governments get kind of crazy and they start shooting people. And so you've got all of these people, because, you know, what happens if you can't feed your kids? That's when the government falls. I mean, that's the Chinese have always had that statement. You know, the emperor loses the mandate of heaven when the people are hungry. And so then some other warlord comes and throws them out because, you know, people are hungry, you haven't got an army. You know, so you've got all of these kinds of things building up. You've got the fact that people are going to be dropping in the fields because it's too hot to work in them. You're going to have construction industry that's not working very well because it's too hot to work in those conditions. You know, we've got, you know, they were starting to put in national regulations to protect workers from excessive heat. And of course, Trump threw them all out. You know, said, we're going to deregulate. So you increase the number of people dying. And if you talking about people dying in the Southwest, the big cities, which are all concrete for miles and miles of sprawl. Phoenix had like 600 people die last year. And it was, you know, it was a little hotter than it's been, but it wasn't anything that they haven't seen in terms of the last few years. 600 people died in Phoenix. Most, you know, that's the ones they could figure out were dying from heat. Most of them don't get diagnosed as dying from heat. So what's that effect on the economy? Or in a place like Providence, where you increase the asthma rate. You know, because we have, along the I-95 corridor, south side, Washington Park, one of the highest asthma places in the world, you know, in the country. You've got the interstate going by there, and then you've got the port with all of its fossil fuel stuff right there. And so those neighborhoods have extremely high asthma rates. So if you make it hotter, and to make the air dirtier by burning fossil fuels, because burning fossil fuels always makes the air dirtier, as well as adding to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All of a sudden, you've got more people who with asthma who can't go to work, or kids who can't go to school. And those all have economic effects. So essentially, the issues around how much damage we're going to do, nobody can nail that down exactly. I've seen estimates from 12 to 70% of the economy will just kind of disappear. You know, not all at once, but gradually it will cut out the growth rate tremendously, and then it will also, you know, constrain people into what they can't do. So there are things you can do about this, but the first thing is that the government in Rhode Island isn't prepared for this. They're starting, you know, you've got some groups like DEM that are starting to take climate seriously, but there is nobody in the legislature, other than a few of the quote-unquote progressives, there's nobody hardly in the legislature who really is looking at this and saying, we have to rethink how we're doing economic development if we're going to prepare ourselves for this kind of a future economy.
Okay. Well, first of all, my reaction to that is you're talking on a macro level, and now toward the end of your discussion, you referred to the effect on Rhode Island, but it's still not a very specific plan as to how we overcome the effects of climate change. You call it climate change or global warming, whatever you want to call it,
right,
on the state specifically. And you did use the term Temperatures soar, so I guess you're talking about global warming, as a result of the CO2. And
yeah, and the temperatures in Rhode Island are hotter than they've been.
yeah, so this is, and you said something about settled science. Now, at the end of the last program, or during the last program, I recall that you said that, I'm looking at the quote, 99% of scientists agree there's an urgent man-made climate change occurring. Is that,
yes,
what you said?
That's absolutely true.
Where did that number come from? Where did you get that statistic, that 99%?
I've seen it in numerous places. I can't tell you what sources because it's been years and people have noticed. But, you've got prominent climate skeptics, and so the Association of Climate Scientists, or an equivalent body, will come out and say, we surveyed our members, and 99% of us say one thing. This guy is saying something totally different, and nobody has actually refuted the physics of it. There's nobody that said more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere doesn't bounce back radiation, because that you can measure.
Yes,
and so there's no question about that.
Okay, but let me interrupt, and I'll try to help people and you understand where it came from. In 2019, Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, claimed that 97.4% of scientists agree that there is a man-made climate crisis. And he based that as a springboard off of a 2013 tweet by former President Barack Obama. Now, as you say, the claim is up to 99%, so they agree. Agree to what? There are millions of scientists in the world, and how many of them were surveyed? When were they surveyed? And what exactly did they agree on? I agree. The overwhelming agreement is that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that has effect on temperature. There's no question about that. The last little ice age ended in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And there has been some warming of the atmosphere since then, no question. The fact is that most of the people who specialize and study climate do not agree on anything, especially whether we face a crisis. I'll give you an example. In January 2005, in other words, before Obama's tweet and Al Gore's comment, a woman named Naomi Oreskes wrote an essay titled, and I'm quoting, "The Scientific Consensus on Climate Change." She said she looked at over 900 articles in scientific journals, and that 75% of them endorsed the idea that climate change is being impacted by human activity. Out of 75% of these 900 articles. Now, a year later, Al Gore said in his movie An Inconvenient Truth that a massive review of every article written on this subject in the last 10 years, they picked 10%, they said 10%, 978 articles found that no one objected to the view that man-made climate change was occurring. Nobody objected to it. Now, this is a fairly clever use of statistics when you come to it, because you're choosing all these articles and then you're picking 978.
And how did they pick them? Did they pick them randomly?
I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So again,
but it's still okay. That's what I'm telling you. What the background is. First of all, scientific consensus is not scientific fact. As you know, there was one scientific consensus that the world was flat, and everybody said, "Oh yeah, the world is."
There was not a scientific consensus because there were no scientists back then.
Well, how about the fact that the consensus was that the universe revolved around the Earth until Galileo came along?
Yeah, right. Because Galileo was the first person who actually looked at it instead of like reading Greek philosophers. But you know,
but he went against the consensus, right?
Right. The consensus, though, was not from science.
Well,
it was from religion.
What I'm getting,
I mean, it was basically theocracy.
And
so eventually, when you start to do science,
regardless of the genesis of it.
No, not regardless of the genesis of it.
Climate change is a consensus that you're saying among these scientists, and we agree that the temperatures have risen since the 1800s, no problem. There was two scientists sent a survey to 10,000 scientists, And he asked two questions. Do you agree that global temperatures have risen since the pre-1800s? The second question, do you think that human activity is a contributing factor? Now, about 30%, only 30% of those surveyed, 3,146, sent an answer, and 90% did say yes to number one and 82% to number two. Still a little ways from consent.
How many of those were climate scientists?
I'm going to get to that. So, they asked specifically, looked at what meteorologists thought about this, at 47% yes to one and 64% to two. Now, of all those responses, only 77 scientists responded. Out of 970, 77 of those said we're climate scientists. 76 of them, 96.2%, said yes to number one, and 75 out of 77 said yes to number two. Hence your magic number, 97.4%, that Al Gore and President Obama were talking about. It's pretty small.
But, you know, how many climate scientists are in the U.S.?
I don't
probably
know.
Only
Not just the U.S. This is supposedly a worldwide survey.
Probably a few thousand total.
So yes, but they're basing this on a response by 77.
Sample.
Okay.
Right, that's a small sample.
Okay. Now, but the American Meteorological Association of 7,000 members did survey, and they got 1,821 of their members to respond. And at 52%, they thought global warming had happened over the 20th century, and is mostly man-made. 52%. A later survey, they had included psychologists, social scientists, journalists. I'm not going to mention that because they're not qualified. So it is not, this is a very limited survey, and so this is a factoid, I call it, that was handpicked out to support this argument.
But I have seen it in other places, and
you know, it's being reported over and over again. I don't disagree that's being reported.
No, I've seen it from other sources.
Like what?
Like, you know, somebody surveyed, you know, an organization of climate scientists.
Yeah.
And they said it. I don't have that source in front of me.
Well, okay, then what I'm doing is telling you where this number came from.
Right. Okay. And what I'm going to tell you is that if anybody is paying attention, you know, I mean, I actually ran into a Rhode Island meteorologist one day. And this was probably 26 years ago. And I'm not going to mention names because they were on the air. And they were just a climate denier. And, you know, they were not willing to acknowledge the climate science of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And, you know, I'd say they
said that this is not having, specifically, this meteorologist said to you, he denied that there's a CO2 increase. Well, then he's in the minority, because I agree with you.
And, you know, it's one thing to have an opinion about an idea. It's another thing to use your own data when there's so much other data. You know, I mean, to say, no, that you know, there's no more carbon dioxide, because you can measure that. And so when somebody says that you can, that they're denying that carbon dioxide is increased, and
Greg, I acknowledge that the general consensus is, in fact, that this carbon dioxide is increased and it has an effect on warming. There's no doubt about it. I'm not arguing that point.
Right.
And so let's look at the history of climate predictions.
Yeah, let's.
50 years ago. Let's start with, let's see.
What did Exxon say? Exxon had people that knew and predicted exactly what we have now.
When?
Back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
50 years ago. They were predicting that. That's part of why people are suing them, is because they actually knew. They had scientists that wrote reports and said, this is how much it's going to be if we keep burning fuel at this rate. And those temperatures that we see rising match. You know, as the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up, the temperatures goes up, and it matches those numbers that the Exxon scientists knew 50 years ago.
In 1943, we were in the midst of the World War II. We were drilling and producing gasoline and petroleum products, not only for our own armed forces, our domestic needs. We're supplying everybody, and the U.S. government said, we've reached peak. We can't produce anymore. We can't get any more oil out of the ground. And of course, in 2018 and 2019, we're a net exporter. But I'm going to go back to 1967, even before you're talking about. There was a prediction in the Washington Post, the Atlantic Magazine, and Evening Standard newspapers that said climate change will cause, quote, dire famine in 1975. And then let's follow this up with 1969. Scientists, and they're quoting a Dr. Eldridge, who is actually a biologist, not a climatologist, said, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam. Then in 1971, Washington Post quoted Dr. S.I. Rapul of NASA and Columbia University, said that, quote, the world could be as little as 50 or 60 years away from a disastrous ice age. 1974, this was repeated in Time magazine, a Columbia University climatologist, George Day Kukla. We're going to go to 1979. This is one of my favorites. Actor Leonard Nimoy, the famous Dr. Spock in the Star Trek series, he appeared on one of these videos, a public information video, and very seriously intoned, quote, scientists are telling us now a new ice age will occur within the lives of our grandchildren. Temperatures are far above and been dropped, temperatures in the far north have been dropping for 30 years. Let's go to the next, let's try 1989. Rising sea levels could obliterate nations, according to UN officials, as reported in The Guardian magazine.
There are nations now that are disappearing. You look at
nations are disappearing?
Small island nations in the Pacific are having to be abandoned because they're going under the water.
Really?
Yes.
Oh. Well,
yes.
That's not being too widely reported, is it?
It has been, if you pay attention to the COP meetings. You know,
what meetings?
The Council of the Parties, the COP meetings that are the global meetings organized by the United Nations. There are small island nations in the Pacific that are actually starting to evacuate their entire populations to places like New Zealand because their islands are going underwater.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting because there was a guy named Rob Rees predicted that Manhattan would be underwater by 2018.
You know, there are people who predicted, but if you look at the predictions from the actual numbers based on, you know, the physics of how carbon dioxide works in the atmosphere, which they started doing in 1895. And Arrhenius, the guy who figured this out, he calculated how much temperature would rise based on how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere. Okay. And his numbers were accurate.
We're not disagreeing.
So why are you spending a lot of time wasting your time and mine on this nitpicking when what you really need to do is figure out where do you stand on this, why are we doing this, and how bad is it going to get? Because what you're doing is basically saying, oh, this and this and this and this, and it's not actually helping the people of Rhode Island figure out what they've got to do because the situation is bad. If you look at the world as a whole, all over the world, there are people finding really bad things going on because of climate change. The fires in LA, you know, billions of dollars just incinerated, and it's because of the climate being hotter and drier, and then when you get a rainstorm, it's like much more intense because the atmosphere being hotter holds more water. So you've got this whole cycle that's going on, and if it was really not going on, why are all the insurance companies bailing out? It's because the situation has gotten to the point where these fires are no longer insurable. So the situation
look, calm down.
I don't want to calm down.
Well, take a breath. Take a breath. Okay, I'm just trying to portray what people are saying that you call deniers.
You're doing this from 40 years ago.
No, I'm not. I'll talk about the lost fires in California.
Okay, talk about them.
The fact is that they don't allow the clear cutting, and they don't allow people to get the brush Don't say no. That's what's happened.
California, what's happening is that people are moving into the urban wildfire
That's
interface.
Right.
And more of those towns are acquiring fireproof buildings, requiring that people clear away around their houses.
No.
More
Stop
and
right
more
there.
of them are.
Don't. That's not.
That's
they may be doing it now,
true.
but hold on.
They may
hold
be
on.
not doing it
Just
now.
hold on a second. That fire that you referred to, that you're saying is due to hotter temperatures, was caused because the environmental controls in California did not allow people, you're right, they're moving out into those areas, and they could not clear the brush and the flammable stuff. They're now allowing the burning of the stuff that is on the ground, and they did not allow the electric company to give them a way to maintain their power lines, so when a power line was struck, it caused the fire. There's no question about that.
I don't have the California laws in front of me, but I do know that they have been improving their laws
But you're talking
regularly.
about after this fire.
After 10 years of every year having fires like this. California, you look at the whole West, you look at California, every place in there, the number of fires, the intensity of the fires, the spread of the fires keeps going up. Why else are the insurance companies bailing out? It's not because of the management. The management has a small role.
You asked me a question, you want me to respond? Why are they bailing out? Because it's costing them more and more to insure those properties that people are putting, just like in Florida now. People are putting solar panels on their roof. The insurance companies don't know what's going to happen if a next hurricane hits. They don't even know how to calculate the losses, so they say, we can't insure this. That's why.
They can't insure the houses, period.
Because of the risk that's involved.
And why are the storms more intense?
The fact is, the observable scientific fact is that the storms are no more intense. Okay, all right.
Then I don't believe you.
No,
I do not believe you, because the storms are getting more intense.
No, they're not.
They're going faster. They don't have more of them, but when they hit, they have more rain, which means more flooding, and the winds have been higher on average.
It's just not true. That's just a talking point. It is not true. This observable science disputes that whole line of argument. Well, you can shake your head if you want.
You've been quoting all of the skeptics, and all of them are basically wrong.
Well, but you're saying that. You're not quoting anybody. You're just saying they're wrong because
I've been looking at this data for 40 years now.
Well, you're not looking at the same data the scientists are.
Why in New England are they spending so much money on making snow in the winter?
I have no idea, but we're not having an ice age because...
We're not having an ice age, and that one was totally debunked, and nobody talks about it anymore.
In 2008, Al Gore, one of the gurus of the climate change movement, said there would be no more ice in the Arctic Circle by 2019. That's what he said in 2008. Wait a minute, let me finish.
Al Gore exaggerates, there's no doubt.
And he got an Academy Award for that movie, that Inconvenient Truth movie, but it was full of, propaganda. The fact is, in 2012, there was 1.67 square miles of ice in the Arctic Circle. In 2013, it had increased to 2.25 million miles.
What's it now?
The point is, it actually does ebb and flow.
It does ebb and flow, but if you look at the data maps, and there's plenty of them, you could get one on a phone right now if you tried. It shows you the average, and the average is decreasing every decade. Every decade, they're down to about they're down to like 1.4 million.
Why does that happen?
It's happening because the Arctic is getting hotter.
Oh.
And the temperatures in the Arctic are going up 3 to 4 times as fast as everywhere else in the world.
I always ask climate change enthusiasts this basic question. 30,000 years ago, we'd be sitting under 40 feet of ice right now.
More like 2 miles.
All right, 2 miles. What happened? Why did it recede? There was no fossil fuel.
Right.
Why did it recede?
There are long-term trends in the Earth's rotation and axis that affect it, and solar cycles. And so, for the last 1.5 million years, we have had an ice age about every 100,000 years. And so nothing has happened to kind of to throw that cycle off.
Oh.
But And the actual amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has changed over time as well. Remember, when Earth was formed, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. So there are long-term physiological things that happen on Earth. Things change. But the fact is, the speed of change under burning fossil fuels has thrown all of those cycles off. We're not going to, have an ice age because there's so much carbon dioxide in the air. Now, I was reading some today that said, over the course of 1 million years, you can pull that carbon dioxide out because the silicate rocks will absorb it, and some of it will be sent into the bottom of the ocean. So on those kinds of time scales, there is change, like, ice ages and interglacials. But on the time frame of the last 250 years, it's unprecedented what we've seen.
Are you familiar with what's called Milankovitch cycles?
No.
Okay. This goes back to I believe a Russian mathematician that.
I got a question for you.
Well, what?
No, let me
save your question.
No, let me stop you for a minute. You have been basically wanting to talk about climate science, but I'm going to talk about the economy.
We have time. We'll get back to it. I'll let you.
Okay, but
I just
I'm calling out the fact that you're wasting a lot of time on minutia, which seems to be
this
your
is
habit.
not minutia.
It is minutia. It is minutia because the science is quite clear, and you're trying to undermine the science when what we really have to do in Rhode Island is start to change the economy because we're already seeing those effects.
So your whole position or argument is based on the fact that climate change is occurring. And I'm looking at this and saying that there isn't this marvelous scientific consensus that 99% of all scientists agree that. No, I agree that there's an assessment that CO2 has an effect on warming.
And you're seeing it, and you can measure it. And it's been measured. And you're not looking at the data.
I certainly have looked at the data. I've looked at as much data as you have.
And what does the data say?
The data says there has been the famous hockey stick.
And that's what we got.
And that whole hockey stick theory has also been disproven.
No.
Well, you can shake your head no.
You can see the data, and you can see, basically, you can watch the El Nino cycles in it.
The El Nino cycle, sure. So let's talk about why the ice ages come and go. Because in the last 1 million years, there's been about 10 ice ages.
Right, and I just said that.
Okay. Well, finally, we agree on something.
Yeah, and that's from the Earth. You got the name for it. I didn't have the name, but I was describing exactly the same thing you were describing.
So what happens is that the Earth does not have a constant position around the sun. It has an elliptical orbit. It tilts on its axis, and it also wobbles a little bit.
Yep.
So there's a professor, Richard Lindgren, I think at MIT, and there's other scientists, astrophysicists who said yes. In fact, one of them has come out with a book called 4 Billion Years of Climate Change, which you may be referring to in your discussion.
I haven't read that, no.
Well, it just came out, and this is astrophysicist Steve Sater, who, one of the ones that says, yeah, the climate is changing. But what he points out is the Milankovitch cycles means that these cycles are inevitable and uncontrollable. They do occur over 400,000 years, and that the next ice age should be here in as little as 8,000 years.
Right.
And
well, that's a normal interglacial in the Pleistocene. Yes.
In his calculations, as a result of the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, this could be shortened to like 4,000 years. I'm really not worried about what's going to happen 4,000 years from now, are you?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you're for...
You know, I tend to think in deep time. You know, the million years of the Pleistocene is just part of the history of the Earth. You know, human beings have been around for 200,000 years. You know, I mean, that's tiny amounts of time.
Exactly, in the global, in the atmospheric,
right.
universal sense.
And you know, there have been major disasters like the ice ball Earth, but you know, never has one been created deliberately, and with the knowledge that you could stop doing it.
Okay, now you said you wanted to bring up some more about the impact on Rhode Island.
Yes. Okay, so if you admit that air pollution causes asthma, and that's a pretty good thing, but you know, nobody has one cause of asthma, there's a lot.
Correct.
So, you know, air pollution, excessive heat. So doing things to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will actually help reduce asthma. You know, planting more trees will reduce asthma because it will clean the air and cool the neighborhoods. So the question is that everything we would do to fix climate actually has an effect on the economy. And I got a great quote from the Bureau of Labor Statistics recently. Let me see what this is. Let me get that right. I will read this short thing. Well, one is, yeah, okay. Okay, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I have the link there, over the next 10 years, employment in mining and related industries will go down, while employment in alternative clean energy will be one of the fastest growing employment categories, although overall job growth will be slower than in the previous decade. I then put in a comment, you know, Donald Trump is trying to, you know, stop the production of clean energy and increase the amount of miners. But even with them trying to do that, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says, no, ain't going to happen. You know, that clean energy jobs will go up much faster and mining jobs will go down, despite what Donald Trump does. Because all the money is based...
Let's stop bringing Trump into this like the evil guy.
No, we have to bring Trump into it.
Why?
Because he's doing everything he can to prevent us from doing the right thing.
Okay.
I mean, closing down a wind turbine farm that was 80% built. I mean, that's the kind of stuff he's doing. And that's where you lose your jobs. But even under the circumstances of him doing that, the private money continues to flow into that and will create many more jobs than mining possibly could.
Okay.
And so that's the kind of thing you need to think of. The other thing I've got is I quoted a UN report. In 2023, global fossil fuel subsidies amounted to $620 billion. Compared to $70 billion for renewables. So when we talk about pricing, you know, for electricity, it's already cheaper to get electricity from solar and wind. And if you think about the subsidies are 9 times as much for fossil fuels as they are for renewables. You know, so that you give them every advantage in the marketplace, and they still can't compete in the marketplace. So what we need to do if we're going to have energy that's affordable for Rhode Islanders, we've got to go fossil fuel free on our electricity. Nobody's saying close things down today, but as we ramp up, we could do this. And the thing that's preventing that ramp up is the fossil fuel industries trying to prevent it through people like Donald Trump, so that they're actually harming all of us.
I see. So let me just, there's one little inconsistency, I think, what you said. You said that more trees help clean the atmosphere, if you will, and help asthma. Well, we seem to be cutting down acres and acres of trees to build solar.
Which we shouldn't be doing. We should not be doing that. Well, and every person I work with says that's a really bad thing, and we've tried to get laws passed to prevent it. Well, so don't blame us for that.
That's fine. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just observing what you said. You agree? We agree.
We agree. Okay. And it's a really bad thing to build solar on forest land. It's absolutely stupid.
Well, but then if the answer to providing all our electric is through renewables, I would assume renewables, by that you mean?
Solar and wind.
Okay. But now you're saying we don't want to cut down any trees or anything to put these solar panels. Where are we going to put the solar panels, enough solar panels to provide all this
Every
energy?
parking lot in the state that
Every
has
parking
solar.
lot in the state?
Every parking lot in the state should get a solar canopy.
Oh. So we're going to park our cars under these solar canopies?
Yes, that means the ground will be cooler, so you'll have less of a heat island effect in all of these places with huge parking lots. They'll all be generating energy. It makes it easier to manage your stormwater. So it's a perfect solution for a large part of. Then Rhode Island Energy, is upgrading all their meters. They keep saying, well, we need to do this for renewable energy. And so it's good, upgrade your meter. And then make sure that every house that has a roof that can face it gets solar. And we could do that in, a fairly short period of time. And if you do it right, you start in the lowest income communities, which are the ones that need the most help with a heat island effect and all the other things. So we could do that, except the people who are, investing say, well, it's cheap to do it here, but it's not cheap for all of us if they cut down the forest. So let's say, make a rule. You put them on every parking lot in the state that has enough sun.
But you also said that we should put them on the roofs of the...
Every building that has an appropriate roof angle.
Who's going to pay for all this?
We're paying for it one way or the other. If we keep losing parts of our economy through the overheat, then, we could do it. Or, how do the fossil fuel companies finance their expansion? They go to the bank. So why don't the banks, instead of paying for something that's going to kill us, start paying for the right thing? And they'll make more money that way. It's creating more jobs. It's creating more opportunity, and it can replace all of that energy. I just saw something that Indonesia is trying to grow its economy at 8% a year, which, is unrealistic, but, for a country that's basically urbanizing and destroying their forests, you can get away with that for a little while. They said they could produce all of the energy they need to fuel this economic expansion by renewables.
You talked about subsidies, though, and when you said there was such a disparity between the fossil fuel, when you say, would you say 70 something?
It's $620 billion versus $70 billion for renewables.
Where does the $70 billion, when you say it's subsidies, where does that come from?
Some of it comes from the federal government. Some of it comes from state governments. Just the same way everything else. A subsidy is obviously coming from the government. So a $620 billion subsidy is coming from governments. Okay.
So a subsidy is nothing more than an admission that the project that is being considered, and I don't care, not just solar, I'm talking about, you want to build a mall called the Providence Place Mall, you've got to give them a subsidy in the form of tax relief.
Which is ridiculous. If it's capitalism, then it's ridiculous.
Okay, but what is the investment tax credit on a solar generating facility?
I don't know what the investment
27%. Okay. So if you and I build a solar generating station for $1 million, we get
$270,000.
$200 of a subsidy, which means a dollar for dollar reduction in our tax bill. And that means that that money that goes to subsidize something else, it's got to come from somewhere.
Where does the $620 billion come from?
I don't know. I've heard
basically what it is it means that they don't pay market rates for things like drilling rights in the national forests and on the BLM land. It means that they get a big tax breaks on depletion.
Right.
They get big depletion allowances.
But is that specifically, you know that for a fact?
Yes. Okay. Depletion allowances.
So where does the $70 billion for the?
Well, the IRA bill that we passed a few years ago has a few billion for building solar farms and things like that. And around the world, people do it. And the Chinese do some of that subsidy.
Well, okay. I just think when we talk about subsidies that if we're giving the people who are building these renewable energy facilities 27% 50% tax credit, then that means that somebody else like taxpayers like you and me have to make up the difference for the Treasury.
We're doing that with the fossil fuels, and it's 9 times as much.
Well, but I don't.
It's nine times as much.
I take your word for that. You're saying that. I don't know where that money is coming from. Well, you don't have to show me the paper.
It's got a link on it right there.
Okay, well, you can show me afterwards. I'll be happy to look at it. But the thing that you said was that there's 60 million people on the move as a result of climate. Well, about 20 million of them or so came into this country, and that wasn't because
That wasn't 20 million of them came here for that.
That's right.
Several million came here, but not. But over the, we're talking about 60 million people on the move right now, not over the last 10 years.
But it's just due to climate?
Not all of them are due to climate, but a very large number of them, because what you do is a lot of them are on the run from wars. Mm-hmm. What's causing the wars?
I don't know.
The wars are mostly being caused by drought.
Oh. Okay.
Because what happens is people start to starve, they start to move, and then they go someplace where other people are moving, and because they're suffering from drought, and they start fighting about water, and they start fighting about food, or they go to the cities and they can't get jobs, and so they have demonstrations, and the government starts shooting at them. I mean, that's what's driving a lot of it. A lot of the Arab Spring in 2011 is driven by the drought in Syria. I mean, that's, the scientists have, they will never say this particular drought was caused by climate change, though they're getting closer and closer to that as they get more and more information. But a lot of the discussion was how a lot of the drought in the Middle East in 2011 was driven by climate. It was hotter and drier, and so the crops failed, and so people move off the farms and go to the city. And once that happens, all hell breaks loose.
You were referring to a UN agency and their study and their report. Was that the IPCC, the international group? That
I don't know if the IPCC writes about refugees, but there's lots of other things.
But you quoted a UN group. I was assuming that's maybe who it was.
There's lots of UN groups doing these things. The Food and Agriculture Organization has stuff like that. Well, I mean, it's pretty common.
This UN group is called a working group. It's the International Panel on Climate Change.
Right. Okay.
And their work includes a review of all kinds of data.
Right.
Extensive review, and these are scientists from all over the world. And they come out with these rather lengthy assessments.
Yep, I've read some of them.
And then, but they do contain a management summary.
Right.
And in one of them, I saw that in the management summary, they said this, quoting, "Predictions of a dire future are often based on models rather than scientific observation." Computer models are not science, they're mathematical exercises.
Right, no, I totally understand how modeling works.
One of the areas they talked about, and I'm quoting again, humans are an ultra-social species, and dissent is far costlier than assent to a perceived majority. And this was a gentleman named Jose Duantes, and he went on to say, global warming has become an ideological and thus a moral issue.
Well,
do you agree to
it has. I mean, partly because we have such an anti-science history in this country that riles its head up every time, things like evolution. The same thing that they've done about climate, they did about evolution. And, so that you always have the Christian right basically saying science is not good. They are saying we want to live in the past. And so, you get that. And, I forgot what the whole question was, but that was where I started. That happens often. So we have to look at the science of it, and lots of people will say all kinds of things and pretend to hook it to the science, but they're not doing the science.
In 1988, the IPCC wrote, and I'm going to quote, "Information on which their assessments reports are based often have a bias from the start because research grants typically fund studies that support the prevailing narrative on climate change. that scientific journals often avoid publishing studies that climate change is not dire. And it's MIT professor Richard Lindgren again said, quote, "The IPCC doesn't do anything regarding natural climate change," meaning the effect of the molecular cycles and all this other stuff. So within these UN study groups, there's actually what you want to call dissent, and it's not this universal idea that this climate is, this increase in the CO2 in the atmosphere is going to affect all of civilization.
That one's from 1988. Yeah. I think if you read the 2023, you'd probably see you would see an acknowledgement that there is dissent, and you would find it even more marginalized, because if you actually keep doing the science, it shows it more every day how bad it's getting. And if you look at the economic predictions, some of them from modeling, some of them from insurance companies, every one of them is saying it's going to get worse because of conditions. And the conditions are not only climate. Some of them are deforestation, which affects the climate. But, loss of minerals. I mean, China, Trump throwing tariffs at China. China says, we're not going to give you rare earths.
Right.
That's going to have huge effects on the economy, because that's what they use to make the computer chips for AI. I mean,
well,
and so that's
now
not
the computer chips for AI, you need rare earth metals to make batteries for driving these electric vehicles.
Well, actually, though, there's a lot of new battery technologies that don't use those things.
Really?
There's a podcast called Just Have a Think, and I watch it regularly. It's the only podcast I watch regularly. It comes on every Sunday, and then it's, available on the web. And the guy, goes and looks at all of the real studies and the real data and shows you what the changes are in batteries. And, he's a skeptic. He says, well, we hear all the hype and what's actually real. And he gives you a lot of that. And so there's an incredible number of new battery technologies that are, close to commercialization. And, the thing about batteries falling on fire, catching on fire, you're hardly seeing any of that anymore because they've improved the battery. They're using lithium ion, but they're starting to find other kinds of metals to use for these things. And they figured out how to stop the dendrites and all of those kinds of things. So there's all kinds of new technologies for batteries. You've got a massive amount of research going into stationary batteries as well as mobile, car batteries, so that you'll be able to use all that, when the wind's blowing hard, you'll be able to store that electricity for a considerable period of time before you send it back out. So you've got all of these things are going, but that's just the energy part. But you have to also help the community part. It's like, you look at what's your economy going to look like, it's not going to look like what it is now. You're going to have to spend more money on green infrastructure around floodwaters, and that's just because, and that's a result of climate change. With the bigger rainstorms, you're going to have to manage your floodwater better. But managing your floodwater better improves the life in the community because it gives you more green space and more trees, and then it becomes healthier. And when the people are healthier, and when everybody is able to be their best self, that improves your economy as well. And so you've got all of these different kinds of things coming together. One of the things, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Thomas Piketty. He wrote Poverty in the 21st Century. It's a book on how inequality harms economies. And so if you were going to do your climate work, what you do is you do your climate work in a way that affects the inequality in the community and the poverty in the community. And that's how you get the additional benefits in the economy of combining those things. And you also, in order to really get a society that's doing that, you have to really defend democracy. Because what you're seeing is in all over the world, including the United States, when you get autocrats, they don't like dissent in the public square. And so, people saying, why aren't we doing this and this, that's the first thing that they try to eliminate is dissent. And usually it's around science and justice. And that's where they go after. They go after science and justice, which means everybody's going to be dumber and we're not going to have the innovation in the economy because you're telling the people who are thinking and are moving forward that you're not allowed to say that. And so that's what's going on.
To define, we got about 5 minutes left, but you referred to inequality. Explain that a little further.
I brought a statistic today.
Okay. We got about 5 minutes. So.
0.1% of the population has more wealth, about 50% more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population. That is a growing inequality. That number has been growing steadily for the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. And the other part of how...
All right, let me just... But what you're describing really is an argument for socialism. You said, you're talking about...
That's okay. I don't mind.
Socialism is okay?
I'm not a socialist.
No,
I've run a business, but let me ask you this: is it socialism when Trump demands that the government get 10% of Intel?
I really don't want to talk about
No.
Trump
But the United States government just took a 10% stake in Intel, and why is that not socialism? So in other words, we have a mixed economy, and we have always had a mixed economy. The government has always been a big player in the economy. We let people make a lot of individual choices.
When they subsidize solar farms and wind turbines, they're taking a stake in that too, because
no, they're not taking an ownership stake.
They may not have an owner, but it's not going to happen without that subsidy.
The subsidy is one thing. The ownership stake, and therefore the long-term manipulation of how that company works, is a different thing. And that's the situation that leads to socialism, or, even more, an authoritarian communism, because that's what Trump is doing. He's taking government stakes in these companies, so that he can put his people on the board. That is an authoritarian approach that is absolutely dangerous and definitely not American.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, then we won't even talk about what happened under the Biden administration and how these guys get so wealthy that never, entire career in government. And we have a guy who was a social community organizer, and he now has estates in Hawaii and Martha's Vineyard. I guess he's not worried about the ocean rising. He's building these waterfront estates in those places, and he keeps a house in Georgetown, the only president who retired and has a residence there, and he's got one in California, I guess. But I'm just curious.
Obama's a best-selling author. He made millions of dollars selling books.
The thing that you just said was like 50% of the people are living, as you say, in poverty?
No, we're not saying 50%, but the actual assets that they own are much less than 0.1% of the population. And if you look at economies, I'll give you a quick number from the tax data. The economy between 1963 and 1979 grew an average of 1.7% a year. From 1980 to 2016, it grew 1.3% a year. And the difference is mostly that after 1980, they reduced taxes on the rich. Taxes on the rich are probably the best thing you could do to develop an economy that works for the entire community.
Okay, we got a minute left, and let me just point out that about half of the people who file tax returns pay no taxes.
Yeah.
And that means that a good percentage of those get something called the earned income credit.
Right.
They get money back from the government because they don't make enough. So, in that,
just like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, all the states that are poor get big subsidies. They get more money from Washington than Washington gives them. And all the states like Rhode Island and New England give more money into the federal government than they get back. So we're subsidizing racism.
Where's the racism?
Down in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. In Alabama and Louisiana, they're trying to gerrymander so that black people don't get to vote.
Oh, boy. We got a lot of problems, folks. No question about it. And thank you for your passion and your discussion here. Hope this was enlightening to everybody who watches State of the State. And come back and maybe we'll get some other interesting guests on. will entertain all of us. And I thank you for your research and the effort that you put into preparing for this program.
This has been quite an enjoyable time.
And I want to thank again all the people that have watched State of the State, and stay tuned for our next edition, which will be in 2 weeks. Thank you. I'm still on camera, so.